Hi, everyone. My name is Maura Walters. I am the founder of Ignite Studio, a digital marketing company based on Long Island. And I have had the distinct pleasure of working with the man sitting right here next to me, Mitchell Schuckman, for almost a year and a half. After a 30-plus career at a large global company, Mitchell is embarking on a new chapter. And as part of that new chapter, he has written a book called Let Me Tell You a Great Story. And today, we are going to have a conversation about that book and the lessons gleaned from it. So, Mitchell, I'm so happy to be chatting with you.
I'm so happy to be here, Maura.
This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yes.
So let's start at the beginning. What inspired you to write this book? Was there a specific moment that sparked the idea? Had this been something you'd been thinking about for a while?
I have had this book swimming around in my head for years, but I just didn't have the motivation to write it. And I was getting ready to retire and getting ready to start this next chapter of my life, which includes starting my own executive coaching and leadership development firm. So I reached out to an old mentor of mine. When I got into coaching, I actually hired a forensic psychologist, and she taught me the power of understanding people and profiling people and getting a sense of what they're all about. So I called her up for some advice, and she says, I've only got one word of advice for you, Mitchell. Write a book. And I couldn't believe that I said, listen, I have a book swimming around my head, but it's just too much work. She said, write the book. And that's what got me motivated to write it, Maura. I really was content having it swim around my head, but I was convinced to write a book from that mentor of mine. Mm-hmm.
And tell me about sort of the premise of the book, Let Me Tell You a Great Story, because you're someone, I think, who really has this unique ability to connect with people on a real sort of human level. And I think a lot of that comes down to finding commonality in great stories. So tell me a little bit about the premise of the book.
So the premise of the book is, I have a lot of experiences in my career that taught me lessons and taught others lessons. And I love telling stories. I think I can relate better to people, and people can relate better to me when I tell a story. So I told these stories that teach lessons, business lessons, in this book. So the book is a series of short stories. There are 30 short stories. They're all based on real experiences that I've had. Facts altered to protect the innocent. But each chapter is a story that teaches a lesson. And the business lessons that it teaches are really how to build better relationships in business, and how to win more work in business, and how to promote yourself better in business. So each story teaches a lesson around that. And I did it in the form of stories because I think people relate to stories. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Can you, without naming names, share one or two really universal lessons from the book?
Well, the universal lessons that I would say are, first and foremost, be authentic. People buy people. People like people. If you can be your authentic self, first of all, that's the easiest person to be, is your authentic self. And if you could be your authentic self, you're going to connect with other people. And I think that's the number one lesson. The other lesson is people connect with people. When people connect with people in business, they like to do business with them. And so oftentimes telling a great story or presenting yourself in a great way is really the way is what people connect with and what people want to work with.
Absolutely. And something that I've always been so struck by is your ability to connect with people. And we were recently at your retirement dinner, and so many people, I think, have this real connection with you. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, in your career, how you've been able to find that common ground with people.
Well, a lot of people ask me that, and I wish I could explain it simply, but I will say this, Maura. In addition to being a certified executive coach, I'm a certified public accountant. I started my career in tax and accounting. And I've said this to people. I said, one of the lessons that I've taught myself in the world is you can be a B or even a B minus in taxes, But if you're an A or an A plus in people, you could still have a very successful career. So I just leaned into the thing I was naturally good at, which really wasn't taxes, but it was really relating to people. I think the way you relate to people the best is pay attention to the other person. If you could really be curious and empathetic and understand that other human being is a human being and understand them a little bit better, they're going to like you.
Yeah.
There are stories in the book that prove that out as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it really relates back to what you said also, that people buy from people. They want to work with people who they feel really, really get them, or are at least taking the time to get to know them and understand their story.
Maura, there's a great story in the book, I'll give a little bit away here, that it's about a character. I won't say who the character is in real life because they won't like me anymore. But there's a character in one of the stories of the book where there is a dinner party. And this character, her name in the book is Aunt Brenda, and she's sitting next to, I can't remember his name, but they're having a deep conversation the entire dinner, and everyone else is wondering what they're talking about. Long story short, this person who was talking with Brenda had the entire meal was about Aunt Brenda. He was asking her questions. He was showing real interest. He was asking good follow-up questions. He was making observations about things she said. And she came away from that dinner saying that was the most interesting person she's ever met. She didn't learn a thing about him, but he listened really carefully to her and made the focus of attention her. And and that's what made her like him. So pay attention to the other person a little bit more, and they will like you a little bit more.
Yeah, I would love to talk a bit more about that if we can, because I think that you are such an incredible listener, and you're really able, I think, to understand what people are saying without them even necessarily outright doing so. Can you talk a little bit more about how listening has helped you in your career, especially with difficult
it's
situations?
Listening and observing. This is, I mentioned at the beginning of this interview how I studied with a forensic psychologist. Yeah. And if you can imagine what she did for a living, one of the things she did for a living was jury selection. So she was identifying, the right person to put on her client's case based upon just a few questions. And it wasn't always the answers to the questions, it was the observations of the human being. So I really think what she taught me is like really purposeful and intentional observation. It's really, and what the other thing she told me to do, which I do a lot, is I create a hypothesis in my head about what makes the other person tick, what's going to make them feel good, and then I take that hypothesis and I run with it. So, and I run with it. In other words, I try to connect with the person on that level. Now, if I learn that I had it wrong, I just change my hypothesis and I keep going. So, I might think you're a happy-go-lucky person, and I'm like, oh, let's be, happy-go-lucky and just kind of go with the flow. And then I realize, actually, they're happy-go-lucky, but they also like structured plans. So I pivot my hypothesis, and I'm like, we could be happy and go lucky and have structured plans too. So it's that power of observation, that creating a hypothesis and being flexible enough to change the hypothesis as you learn more about the other person. It's a fun game. If you really do it, if you really embrace it, it's a fun game, and people will really connect with you.
I love that. Wow, what an interesting way of thinking about people. Have you ever leaned...
I think about you too, Maura. I'm like, what makes Maura tick?
I think happy-go-lucky with some structure. I think you nailed it.
Yeah, well, I was thinking of you. So,
have you ever leaned on storytelling in tough situations to find common ground with people? And if so, could you share one of those instances?
Well, one of my favorite quotes, and it's in the book, is, if I say it right, don't let the truth stand in the way of a good story. That's a Mark Twain quote. And I feel like if you can tell a story that the other person really relates to, even if the facts aren't exactly right, It really can go a long way. And I told this. I was helping coach a young manager in my firm who was going into a big meeting, and she was going to be introduced to this client as the new lead manager on the account. And boy, was she a nervous wreck. And when I sat down with her to practice for this meeting, she started talking about all the things she does. I keep a to-do list. I have regular phone calls. I project manage everyone's tasks. It was fact. And she was, by the way, kind of quivering in her voice as she told these facts. So I said, let's stop practicing for a second. Can you tell me about like a really good day at work? Tell me like a day with a client that went really well, just because I could get to understand better what you do. So she started telling me about this really great day with the client, how she actually stopped at Starbucks on the way to the client. She brought coffee and muffins for her and the client. They had a really great meeting discussing a real difficult problem. The client thanked her profusely and then said, and then she met a friend for lunch. I said, that's a great story. Tell that story. She's like, but I'm not really covering all the tasks I do. I said, yes, but the person's going to want to work with you. And she couldn't believe it. I said, that's your pitch. The story is your pitch. And she went in and she told the story. And you know what the client said? The client did not say, do you also do project management? The client said, can we do Monday mornings with muffins and coffee too? She got the job. She was a huge hit. But that story really made the connection.
Yeah. It leads me to my next question, which is talking about how establishing that trust and establishing connections is so important in business. Is there ever a right time to utilize storytelling to establish that trust with a client? And how do you know when you're ready to go there with a client, with a prospect? Sort of like getting off, everything that's in our proposal and really being like, let me just tell you a story here. Let's connect on a different level.
Okay, it's almost always a good time to tell a story. It really is, because stories don't have to be long. They don't have to have, they just have to be anecdotal. And I don't know, you're speaking to someone, like the woman who I just described. You're speaking to her and you see that she did her fact, and she was quivering in her voice. Before I said, you should try this, before I said, tell me about a great day at work, I said this to her, and I do this often. I said, you sound a little bit nervous. And she said, a little bit. And I'm like, well, I could totally relate to that. Can I ever tell you about when I went into my first big meeting with a client? And, I have to tell you, I was like shaking in my boots. And if only I had someone who could give me the advice that I'm about to give you about telling a story, I would have felt so much more comfortable. Yeah. So know that this is where this is coming from. I feel the way you feel right now, and the advice I'm going to give you should help. Well, that calmed her down completely. She's like, you had this problem too? I'm like, we're all human beings. We all have these problems. And I think people relate to you instantly. So it's always a good time for a story. Yeah. Even if it's a short one.
Yeah. Do you ever give this advice to people who are maybe brand new at their companies and feeling like they really have to prove themselves and they have to, stick to the book and stick to the script and can't really bring any of their personality or background to a client pitch, for example?
Well, they're wrong.
Yeah.
Maura, okay, I hope my children don't listen to this interview because I have 4 boys. And when they were teenagers, they used to ask me, how do I get a girl to like me? And I used to say, talk about them. Don't go into your first date and tell them what a great golfer you are and how much you enjoy video games and what your favorite pizza place is in town. Ask them what they like. Mm-hmm. Ask them what they enjoy. And then lean into it. Be curious. Find out more about them. I said, they're going to like you. You might even get a kiss goodnight. But it's the same with business. If you could just if you could break down those silos by relating to the other person and making the other person the hero in the conversation. Look, you'll have a chance to introduce yourself too, but that's not what goes first. It's always about the other person.
Yeah.
It's the secret to success in business. Make it about the other person.
What advice do you have for people who have been promoted into new roles and have this sense of imposter syndrome? Because I know you coach executives through that a lot, and you probably lean on storytelling a lot in that capacity. Maybe you can share a little bit around imposter syndrome.
Well, okay, I coach a lot of people about imposter syndrome. Here's what I hate about imposter syndrome. It's not a syndrome. It's not a sickness. It's a human thing. It's a reaction to being in a new and uncomfortable role. That's okay. That's human. Own the moment. You're new in a role. It's okay. It's okay to say, I'm the new guy. I'm the new person. I'm just getting my arms around things. It's okay to ask questions. You don't have to know it all. Maura, I was actually, in my career, I was promoted into a role that I was not qualified for. But I was so excited that they asked me that I took it. And I remember finding people I was comfortable, pulling aside and saying, I've got some really stupid questions to ask you. Would you be willing to help me? Of course, everyone's willing to help you.
Yeah.
And, I feel like if you kind of like lean into that new role and say, I don't need to be everything all at once, and embrace the fact that you're being human and you're going to get there. You weren't asked to be in the role if you weren't capable of being in the role. I mean, think about sports. How many rookies get called up to the major leagues and are superstars right away? Not very many. But why are they called up to the major leagues? Because they're going to be a superstar, and everyone who knows better knows it. That's what imposter syndrome is. You rookies in sports, they feel like, what am I doing in the major leagues? Well, someone who knows better put you there. And when you get promoted to a big role, someone promoted you there because they know you're going to be great. Not because you're going to be great on day one, but you're going to be great pretty soon. So embrace that and go with it.
Yeah, I love that. Such good advice. Do you have any insight on how teams can potentially lean into storytelling, sort of make business run more smoothly?
Where I've used stories with teams is to get teams to rally around, a particular behavior or a particular dynamic. Anyone who's worked on my team is going to laugh because they've heard me say this 1,000 times. But one of my favorite quotes in business when I'm leading a team is Michael Jordan's quote that players win games and teams win championships. And I often tell a story about Michael Jordan, who was a superstar right out of college, but his teams weren't winning because he was great at scoring, but wasn't great at making his teammates better. He never passed the ball. And one day his coach, Phil Jackson, said, listen, Michael, this is how I heard the story, but it doesn't matter. Don't have to let the truth stand in the way of a good story. It's a good story. I say, listen, he said to Michael, you're great, but if you're going to be great alone, I don't really need you. You need to help make everyone on your team great. That's real greatness. And that's what I would tell my team. I would say, if you're a great performer and you don't make your teammates better, I actually don't need you. But if you're a great performer and you make your teammates better, I'm going to recognize it. You're going to be rewarded. The whole team's going to be better. We're all going to rise as a team. I tell that story a lot to my team, and I repeat, players win games, teams win championships, and the team leans into helping each other and not working in silos and not working in competition with one another. That's just one example of a story that I've used to rally a team. So that's an example of how stories can work with teams to build a behavior and a culture.
Right. What a perfect story also. What a perfect story and example about team building. I love that. So my final question for you, Mitchell, is with everything changing in our world so fast. AI, remote work, geopolitical challenges, all of those obstacles. How do you think the role of storytelling in leadership is evolving?
Well, all of the things you mentioned are, like, I can tell you, I've been in business for almost 4 decades. And I many times have said, oh, nothing is as challenging as this. But this, what we're facing today, is exponentially more challenging than anything that's ever happened in business in my life. And all of the things you mentioned are creating intense human stress and anxiety, like paralysis anxiety in leaders, in business, in all sorts of industries. So, how do people help people in those situations? It's connecting one-on-one, it's using stories, it's being relatable, and it's really caring that make a difference. So as a coach, I lean into that heavily, but as any executive who's listening to this interview should feel, now's the time to lean really heavily into the human connection. If you can use stories to relate to someone, you're going to make the world a better place, one conversation at a time.
Okay, I have one more question for you.
Maura, what are you doing?
Where can people find your book?
That's a good question. I have an audio book narrated by the author himself. And I have a hard copy book that you can order on Kindle and Amazon, but also on Apple Books. You can also get more information about me and my new business, the Schuckman Group, at theschuckmangroup.com, which is a great website that Maura designed for me. So, yes, that's how you can find out all about me, Maura.
Excellent. Mitchell, it was such a pleasure. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure,
as always.
Maura. Thank you.